Chris Carroll,
How you
welcome to
doing?
Vlad TV.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
So let's kind of lead up to your story, up to the tragic event that happened in Las Vegas that night. Why did you initially decide to become a cop?
Well, I initially started when I was a teenager. I had uncles that were both LA sheriffs, and I used to go ride along with those guys when I was a teenager, and I knew right away, I'm like, man, this is for me, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do up to that point. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer at the time, which is almost comical looking back at it for me, but I knew when I saw police work, I'm like, this is meant for me.
Okay. And you became a cop at what age?
21.
Okay.
I did my first, I hired on 21 years old with City of San Diego Police Department. I was there for 2 years, and I kind of wanted to go back to Vegas because that's where I'm from. So after I did 2 years in San Diego, I ended up going back to Las Vegas for another 23 years.
Okay. Now, during the 80s and 90s, what was happening in Las Vegas in terms of gangs?
Well, I tell you what, there's a big click up from the 80s to the 90s. Las Vegas in the 90s experienced a huge boom in growth. And there's a lot of growing pains that come with that, and including a lot of crime, a lot of people coming from other places in the country, all ending up in Vegas, and a lot of gang activity was kind of happening at that time. Up until the 80s, you're going to get some gangs in any city, but Las Vegas wouldn't be, certainly wasn't a hotbed of gang activity in the 80s. And then in the 90s, we kind of saw that coming in.
Mm-hmm. And was it Crips, Bloods, that type of thing?
Yeah, it was a little different back then because you had your Crips and your Bloods and various sectors of the Crips and the Bloods and a couple other, Hispanic gangs and so forth. And things are so different now because, instead of having a couple of large gangs, now it's just kind of like everybody's doing their own thing. And, one guy will belong to 3 different gangs. And, the gangs don't have, you see mixed races in gangs now, which you'd never see before. And just all these hundreds of little gangs all over the place.
Okay. So, leading up to the incident, you were a bicycle cop.
Right. I was a sergeant assigned to, I had a bike squad, which is me and about 12 officers on the Las Vegas Strip.
Okay. Now, why bicycles?
Bicycles are a great place to patrol a place like the Las Vegas Strip because the traffic is so thick. You have so many tourists, a lot of foot traffic, a lot of vehicle traffic. And most of the time, you can actually get from one place to another better on a bicycle than you have in a car, than you can in a car.
Okay, but everyone was actually armed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're still regular police officers working for the same police department. What we do is we take turns. Somebody would drive the paddy wagon that day. So whenever we arrested somebody on a bike, we'd have the paddy wagon come pick them up. And we'd, handle every kind of police work that regular cops and cars do.
So the night of the Mike Tyson fight, you were actually by yourself on a bike?
Yes.
Now, a lot of times don't cops have their partner with them?
They always have a partner with them when they're on bikes. But I was a sergeant of the unit, so typically I would work alone, and I'd go around to different calls that the different officers are going to on their bikes. So I'm kind of their supervisor. And occasionally I would ride with another officer or something, but this night I was alone.
Okay. So tell me about what was going on in Vegas the night of this fight.
Well, it was Mike Tyson fight night, and Mike Tyson fight night, it was, no matter who he's fighting, the biggest night going on in Vegas. I mean, he probably had, three fights a year or so, and those were always huge events in Las Vegas. And it was a lot bigger than the fight itself, and particularly when Mike was fighting. When Mike was fighting, it wasn't like when anybody else was fighting. If Mike was fighting, it was an event. It was like the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, and we'd get a lot of people come down from all over the world, actually, but a lot of people from California, and a lot of gang influence coming in for the Tyson fight. So you'd see a lot of activity on the Las Vegas Strip. Gang activity and not gang activity, a little bit of everything going on.
So you would see fights, shootings, that type of thing?
Yes, it was. There was a lot of people that came in town. They wouldn't even go to the fight. They just are there for the whole big event, and a lot of times that came with a lot of trouble. So it was busy. It was always really, really busy, and a lot of stuff going on. A lot of fights, shootings, stabbings. I mean, pretty much everything you could think of would go on during the fight night. And it's nothing would ever happen during the fight. It's like the world stood still while the fight was on, and as soon as it was over, bam, everything starts.
So after the fight happened, there was the altercation between Tupac and his entourage and Orlando Anderson.
Right.
The fight occurred. Did you know about it while it was happening?
I did not know about it at the time. It didn't come up later until the investigation started. And while we know now, in hindsight, that it was a significant factor in the events of the night, at the time, what we have basically is a fight between a group of guys. Nobody's armed. There's nobody shot. There's nobody stabbed. There's no shots fired. And they have their fight, and they kind of disperse themselves, really, and go their separate way, and it's over. So it was almost really, as far as the police were concerned, kind of a non-event.
So the death row entourage ends up leaving the MGM.
Right.
And Suge Knight and Tupac are in the BMW.
Correct.
And I guess they get pulled over.
You know what? I've heard that. I don't know of that personally, though. I've never had anybody tell me that they were the ones who pulled them over. But word is that I've heard that they were stopped sometime during that night for traffic stop, loud stereo, something to that effect, and they just told them, "Hey, turn your stuff down. See you later." And that was the extent of that traffic stop.
Okay, so there's no ticket?
There's no ticket.
Okay, and did you talk to the officer who did that?
I did not. I've never heard anybody, for me personally, I don't know who it was.
Okay, so we don't know if it actually happened or not.
Exactly. I could not tell you for sure that happened.
Okay, so let's fast forward to later that night. You were on your bike.
Right.
And what happens?
Well, it's after the fight and things are busy, and there's all kinds of stuff going on up and down the strip. I was on my bike, right side, just on the what would be the north side of the MGM, because there was a lot of activity over there. I was on my bike, and over the radio, some other officers came on and said there's shots fired at the corner of Flamingo and Koval, and that there were vehicles fleeing the scene. So it's actually the officers hearing the shots and putting it out over the air. So they, as the group of vehicles fled, they started to give chase. So they're on bicycles, and they weren't able to keep right up with them, but they didn't completely lose them either, because traffic is thick and it's hard to go fast in a car in that area. So they broadcast their location and the way they were going while they're chasing the vehicles, and they're just saying, everything's in generalities at that point. There's been shots fired, and they're they don't know which car is involved, but they're chasing a group of cars on their bike, and they're headed westbound on Flamingo, which is towards the Las Vegas Strip.
So they were chasing basically the death row cars.
Right. A group, you know what, and that's the thing, is we don't know at the time, and there's still some unanswered questions about that, but they're chasing a group of cars, which, of course, as it turns out, one of those cars is Suge and Tupac.
Right, in the BMW
Yes.
7 Series.
Right.
So no one actually chased the car that was doing the shooting, which was the Cadillac?
No.
No. Okay.
No. But you got to understand, they don't know which car is the shooter
Yeah.
at the time. They just hear the shots from, I think they were in a parking garage, so they're a couple of stories up and a few hundred yards away, and they just hear the shots come from the group of cars.
So how do you arrive on the scene?
They said they were heading towards the Strip, and I was already on the Strip, so I started heading northbound, and they were, as they're in pursuit, we're heading in the same directions. The group of cars is heading towards me, I'm heading towards them. So as they reached they're going down Flamingo, they hung a left on Flamingo, which puts them southbound, which is going towards the MGM and towards me. So I was going northbound. So we're literally heading towards each other. And my concern at the time, I was on my, like I said, I'm on a bicycle. I'm thinking, how am I going to stop these guys? And I don't know, but we'll see. You know, I'm still going to head there and we'll see what happens. You know, usually we use hand signals, whistles, and things, and people will almost all the time pull over for them if you pull over for you if you direct them to. But these are guys that are already running from the police, so I figured I'd do what I can. If I can't stop them, I can't stop them. But there I am. So I was heading northbound. They were heading southbound. As we hit Harmon, which is a street that T-bones right into the Strip, they tried to make a left turn onto Harmon. And as they did that, I was coming right up on Harmon. So Suge's car, Suge and Tupac's car, had already blown out 2 tires from hitting a curb during this chase, and you could see on the rims of the car where there's been a significant impact on the car. So when they made the left turn, kind of at a high rate of speed, they sort of spun out there in the intersection. And right as they spun out, they're literally spunning out, and I'm running right into them. So I'm right there. So it wasn't a matter of me getting to the scene, we really ran into each other. So I kind of laid down the bike. The cars came to a screeching halt. Tupac's car kind of spun out a little bit out of control there in the intersection. And I knew that one of these guys, one of the cars at least, was involved in a shooting, but I had no idea who anybody was. So as soon as the cars stopped, the doors popped open, and everybody kind of just jumped out to see what was going on. And I pulled out my gun, and I tried to yell at everybody to get down on the ground. I knew I was in a bad situation because I was alone, and it was physically in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. So there's people everywhere. These car doors open. There's, I don't know how many guys, I want to say 8 to 10 guys. I could tell right away, you know, these guys were kind of hardcore. They looked like gangsters, you know, tough looking dudes. So I yelled at them all to get on the ground. Some did and some didn't. You know, some guys did, and then I could see them looking at each other like, you know, are we going to listen to him, or are we going to run, or are we going to go after him? You know, it was just kind of a strange little standoff there for a few seconds, and I wasn't sure what to do either, because I thought for certain it was going to be a shooting. I thought for sure, I'm like, here we go. It's going to be, we're going to shoot it out here right in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. And as ridiculous as it sounds, one of the things in my mind at that time was, I'm going to get in so much trouble for being in a shooting in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. It was just a bad situation, but that's, you know, that's how we all ended up there. I'm going kind of person to person, running around, hopping, moving, and I'm so concerned about where the shot's going to come from, because I'm still thinking that there's going to be a shooting. And no shot came, no shots fired. And that's when I noticed that of all the cars, and everybody was kind of out, there was one car, and I can still see a guy sitting in the passenger seat of the car. And I thought, in my mind, this is probably the guy that's going to try to shoot me, because everybody else is out of the cars there's there. And, you know, nothing's more dangerous than a guy still sitting in the car, because he's got access to everything all around him, and you can't see him. You know, all I can see is, you know, from the shoulders up in the window. And I figure this is probably the guy that's getting ready to shoot me. So I kind of keyed my attention on him, maybe even to a fault, you know, kind of tunnel visioned on that guy. And I came up to him, I was yelling at him to open the door. When I came up in the car, I could see that there was bullet holes all in the side of the door. Their bullet holes were kind of right around the handle, and there was also one or more in the windshield right in front of the passenger side. So I was approaching on the passenger side.
I guess the car had been shot 13 times?
You know, I couldn't tell you the exact number, but there were definitely several multiple hits on the car. So I reached over, and I was not going to let this guy sit in the car and take me out, so I grabbed the car door, pulled the door open, and I was having a hard time getting the door open. And I think, and I'm still not positive, but I think the bullets being in close proximity to the handle itself, I think they somewhat disabled the mechanics of the door handle. And I was pulling it and couldn't get it open. So, which was just making me even more concerned. I'm like, I got this guy here and now I can't even open the door. And I just pulled it and finally it popped and it came opened. When I pulled the door open, now we've still got people running around, people are yelling. I'm trying to watch these other guys a little bit. And now I've got, at this point, Suge Knight is coming up behind me. And, you know, I'm looking at him and here's this guy is giant and I'm just like, man, this is a bad situation for me. And I pulled the door open, and when I pulled it open, the guy sitting in the passenger seat, who turns out later to be Tupac, he kind of slumped out, came out with the door. So he's in the car, he's leaning against the door, and as I open the door, he kind of spills out. So he spilled out, and I just kind of grabbed him with one hand, and then I was pointing the gun at Suge with the other, because Suge is still trying to run up to me, and you know, the guy's clearly a threat. He was also just absolutely gushing blood out of the side of his head, but he's acting fine. I mean, he's not incapacitated in any way. He's shooting blood out of his side of his head, and he starts yelling at Tupac, and he's yelling at him, Pac, Pac, and he just keeps yelling, Pac. And I can see, then I look down, I can see Tupac is trying to yell back to Suge, and he's just kind of not physically able to do it. And he's kind of, you know, you can see him sort of mouthing, and they're in eye contact with each other. And he's trying to get something out to yell at Suge, and he can't get the words out. But he's still, you know, he's fully conscious. He's moving. He's kind of squirming, and that's when I looked at him, and there was, you know, an extensive amount of blood on him, and I saw that he had. I couldn't tell exactly where it was, but he had clearly had torso wounds, which are, of course, you know, almost always going to be life-threatening. So I realized then this guy has a good possibility of dying. So I looked at him and I said, you know, what happened? Who shot you? Who did this? You know, what's going on? And he's just really just kind of ignoring me. He's not even, you know, even though I'm right there holding him, he's just kind of not acknowledging my presence, and he's trying to yell back at Suge. Well, I turned around at Suge, and that was the first time I noticed. I saw the back of another bike officer, and he was pushing Suge away from me, and that's the first time I realized there's other cops there, so that made me feel a lot better. So he kind of pushes Suge back, and Suge is still yelling, Pac, Pac. He's trying to yell at him, and then I saw Tupac just, all of a sudden, just in an instant, he went from trying to, you know, kind of squirming, looking at Suge, trying to get the words out, to where you could tell he physically just gave up. He just wasn't able to do it. And he just crossed that line into just quitting and being at peace. And he just kind of laid back and was calm and was no longer looking or trying to do anything. And I could just see that he was just, you know, it's kind of like almost like an athlete or a runner when they hit that wall, and it's just like it's over, and you could see that in his face. And I looked at him once again. I said, what happened? Who did this? Who shot you? And now he's looking at me, so we're looking at each other in the eyes, and this is kind of the first time he's even acknowledging my presence. And he looked at me, and I could tell he was, you know, he was getting a breath together to tell me, and he looked me right in the eyes, and we looked at each other, and he said, fuck you. And he said it just like that, with the emphasis on that F, to, you know, to really let me know. That's how he felt. So he said that, and right after he said it, he just kind of started, you know, started gurgling, and you could tell he was in bad shape, and his eyes, he's starting to lose consciousness then, and his eyes roll back. And as it turns out, that would be his last conscious moment and his last words.
So once he realized that you were a cop, and I guess you were asking him because there's something called a postmortem.
And police work, we have something called a dying declaration. Yeah. And basically what that is if someone is dying and believes they're dying, whatever they tell you, if you can get that information, is not hearsay in court. If you need to go in court and testify what they said, those statements are open season. It doesn't happen a lot. I've only, him and one other guy in my 25 years of police work, where I've had a dying declaration situation.
But once he realized that you were a cop, he didn't want to have anything to do with you.
No, I think he just, he didn't feel like, I think the guy was pissed. I think, whether he knew he was going to die or not, I mean, who's to say? But he seemed like a guy that was pissed off that he was in the situation he was in, and he's trying to talk to his friend, and I think he just viewed me as an obstacle and somebody asking him something he didn't want to talk about. And, so he let me, he told me what he told me.
And you had said that Tupac had a bunch of jewelry on him, and the jewelry was covered in blood.
He had a lot of gold jewelry, and that's always, when I think back, I mean, I remember the whole night well, and I remember that just the thick gold jewelry just being coated in blood, to where that blood was just kind of coagulating right there in that jewelry.
Suge, who was hovering around you, was now being pushed back by another officer.
Right, another officer was there.
Another bicycle officer?
Yes.
So, what happens next?
What happens next is we've just got, even though the immediate threat is a little bit down, and now I see that there's other cops there, it's still just an absolute mess of a situation. I mean, we've got one guy dying, we've got 10 cars all in the middle of the intersection, middle of Las Vegas Strip, traffic blocked both directions, crowd gathering. And we just not only am I the guy there, but I'm the sergeant, so I'm the one that's supposed to do something here. I could tell when I looked at Tupac that this was going to be something beyond first aid. I couldn't really do anything for him. His injuries were too severe. So I stayed there with him. Some of the other cops are now getting the guys that are part of his crew or part of the incident, and they're trying to round them up. And those guys are not terribly cooperative. There's no fights or anything, but it's kind of like a passive resistance where they're not doing what we ask them to do. They're not going where we want them to go. We're trying to kind of corral them so that we can get people patted down, check the cars for weapons. Never found any weapons in the cars or on anybody. And we're trying to section those people off. And another thing that you have to try to do is, because they're witnesses, they need to be kept separate so people don't get their stories together. Well, that's easier said than done. And we still didn't have, it took a while for police cars to get there, because it's right in the Strip, and the first guys there were on bikes. And I want to say we waited, it's my best guesstimate, 4 to 5 minutes before some cars and an ambulance got there.
So an ambulance comes fairly quickly?
4 to 5 minutes is probably my best guess.
Pretty fast.
Not too bad, yeah.
So the ambulance comes, and they grab Tupac.
Right.
Put him in the ambulance.
Yeah, they do kind of they could see he's in bad shape, so they just kind of grab him and go. So right when they were going, I grabbed one of the cops who worked for me, and I said, go ride with those guys to the hospital. So they put Suge, and Suge is still gushing blood. He's acting fine. He's not showing any signs of injury, but he's just spurting blood out of the side of his head. So I grabbed a cop, and he grabbed another cop, and those two rode in the ambulance to the hospital.
So Suge is in the same ambulance as Tupac?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I told them, try to get a dying declaration. I didn't think it would happen, and it didn't. He never was conscious again, but just in case they would be there, in case he did.
So now you have the rest of the entourage there. You've
Right.
got the Outlaws and the Bodyguard, I think Frank Alexander and so forth, and some death row people. Do you start to question these guys?
We do. Once we go through, we'll go through a couple other basic things. Like I said, make sure there's no weapons. We got to get the crime scene secure. We want to try to identify the people who's got ID. Start running the license plates, whose car is whose. Start matching things up, and then once the dust settles, sort of a thing, then you start asking questions. And at that point in an investigation, you're talking very preliminary type of questions, you know, that come down to, for the most part, who are you and what happened? Just, you know, very general stuff. What happened tonight? What did you see? Do you know these people? All of these type of very generalized questions. And we're just not getting any answers really from anybody. Nobody wanted to talk. And it wasn't open defiance, you know, like, screw you. It was more, well, you know, I didn't see anything from where I was at. And yeah, I heard a couple of shots, but, you know, that was it. So going round and round, we're from the beginning, we're getting no cooperation from anybody there.
So nobody is actually giving you the real story?
Nobody. They're not even giving us a story at all, really. You know, that we call investigators. They come down to the scene, but I mean, you're talking probably an hour, maybe more, before those guys get there. So, you know, we're still trying to keep people separated, still trying to talk to them, still trying to get these preliminary questions out of the way, trying to match people up with the cars, and so forth.
So how long do you keep everyone out there? I mean, does anyone actually get brought into the station or anything else like that?
I don't know if they came into the station that night. They may have, you know, this is the type of thing, it went on through the night. And eventually at some point in this thing I leave, but.
Right, because you're not the investigator.
I'm not the investigator, exactly. Okay. So I take care of everything on the scene with the guys as best I can. We get them as much information as we can available, but as far as following up the next day and farther on, that's really doesn't have anything to do with me.
You believe that Tupac was already dead by the time he arrived at the trauma center?
I think he probably had some heartbeat, but there was no consciousness. It's always hard to get the medical people to talk too much because they're bound by certain federal regulations and they're not allowed to give too much information. But I think for practical purposes, he was basically dead. I think because they are a highly skilled top-level trauma unit, they managed to keep his heart beating for a couple days, but there's really no activity there at all.
Right, because it was announced 6 days later that he died.
Right.
I think his lung got removed or something.
They did rush him into immediate surgery to do what they could do. And like you said, I think a lung was removed, and eventually it was his mother who made the call to just remove him from life support.
Oh, so he was removed from life support?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
At what point did you start to realize how big this really was and who just got killed?
You know what? It was surprisingly a long time. I did, talking to some other cops who were at the scene later, none of us realized that this was going to be that big of a deal. I know now that probably sounds ridiculous or maybe even a little bit rash, but during that time period, there were a lot of rappers and so forth that were getting murdered. There was so much of that going on, and we all remember Tupac and Biggie because they were so famous. But for every one of those guys that got killed, there was 100 street corner house party rappers that were getting it all the time. And it was a homicide. We knew the guy was famous. I don't think really the guys that I was there with realized what they were part of either. And in time, it kind of got bigger and bigger. And I think personally, he's probably bigger now than he ever was when he was alive. Kind of like Elvis, same sort of a thing. They die and they get bigger and bigger.
Right, especially since he died so young. He was in his
He was
mid-20s.
a young guy.
Yeah.
I think he was about 26 or so.
Yeah. Even though you're not the investigator, I assume you're still keeping up on the case?
To some degree. I knew the guy. I still know the guy. The guy who was one of the main investigators, Brent Becker, strangely enough, was when I was a brand new cop, he was my training officer. And I'd always kept in touch with him, always got along with him real well, and still do. Talked to him not too long ago. And he's moved out of state, and I don't think he personally really cares to talk about it anymore. And you know, when me and him talk, we don't talk about this. You know, we talk about other stuff.
The biggest rapper in the world gets killed in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip, and Las Vegas PD does not know who did it.
We don't. But I'll tell you, the real reason is because we got no cooperation. Even the guy who gets shot says F you, you know. The witnesses won't talk. Nobody wants to do anything for the police. And you know, a lot of these, you know, there's been criticism because we don't have an arrest of a suspect. But we didn't get any cooperation from the word go. I think Suge Knight showed up to do his interview with the police the next day or the day after. He shows up with 3 attorneys and basically has nothing to say. You know, if anybody knew what was going on, it was probably him, because he was in the mix from the word go. I mean, he saw everything. He got shot himself. No one's going to have more information than him, and we get nothing from him. So it's hard enough to get a homicide case on, even when you have good information, and we're dealing with almost no information, as well as a drive-by shooting, which tend to leave very little in the way of evidence. I think there was some shells recovered from the scene, and of course the slugs that were inside of Tupac, and that's basically it. There's just not much to go on. And I know you're probably going to want to talk more about this, but the guy who is the main suspect is dead. So clearly this is not going to go anywhere further.
So at one point, a picture gets released,
Right.
which shows Tupac on an operating table, sliced apart.
Right.
And most people assume that this is a fake picture.
It's not a fake picture. It's a real picture, unfortunately. And it shouldn't have happened. I remember at the coroner's office there, because of that incident, that picture getting out, there were policy changes. I think some people were reprimanded and so forth. I don't know who actually took the picture. It was before we all had phone cams, so it was taken with an actual camera. But it's hard, especially if you've never seen an autopsy. In simplest terms, an autopsy is brutal. It's not for the faint of heart. And here you have a guy who's a celebrity, a famous, loved celebrity, laying on the table with a Y incision cut in his body, and the back of his head opened up, and I think it's just more than people can comprehend. So everybody says it's fake because it's just too much to take in. Well, unfortunately, it's not fake.
So essentially, after Tupac was declared dead, the body was taken to the coroner's office.
Right.
And they sliced him open.
Yes, they do a full, any homicide victim is going to get an extensive autopsy for documentation should the case be prosecuted.
So Tupac gets killed. There are no charges filed against whoever killed him.
Right.
So the conspiracy theories start to emerge.
There's a million of them.
There's a million of them. The biggest one was that Suge somehow had Tupac assassinated.
I say absolutely not. Didn't happen. 2 reasons. First of all, you don't have somebody killed who's sitting right next to you, because it puts you in harm's way as well, which is evidenced by the fact he's shot in the head during this shooting. He takes her around to the head, and by the grace of God or luck or whatever you want to call it, the trajectory of the bullet is such that it just doesn't penetrate his skull and kill him. Second of all, is that when I was at the scene with these guys, and it was heat of the moment, you know, blood flying, people yelling, Suge clearly was very worried about Tupac. I could see it in him. He was almost panicked as he was looking at Tupac, and he could see that he was in seriously bad shape. He was almost panicked, worried about him. And I think, you know, in those kind of situations, acting just doesn't work. If that was acting, he's the best actor that's ever set foot on the ground, because it was clearly, to me, not acting. It was heat of the moment stuff going on, and I saw concern and almost panic on his face and in his voice.
Right, and this wasn't like, someone with a sniper rifle from across the street,
Right.
that had one bullet that hit Tupac in the head and instantly killed him. There was bullets all over the car.
Right, close range shooting from a pistol, per some of the witnesses, very short range type of shot. I mean, a matter of feet, just a couple feet away. So, and I don't know how many rounds are fired, but it was 14, 16. That's typically what a magazine holds. So that would be somebody emptying out the gun.
Emptying out the clip
Right.
on the car. There was a theory that you killed Tupac.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There we go with the internet. It's one of those things. There had been so many theories, and then when this came out, I think it started as people who leave comments after a story on the internet. And somebody mentioned it, and then somebody said, hey, white cop, he's armed, he was there, might be him. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, anybody who knows any facts about this case at all would realize that it's just not possible with the way things happen and the witnesses and everything else. There was even a story I read that I had switched the body.
Right.
I'm like, I'm a guy on a bicycle. I don't have another dead guy on the back of my bike to switch a body. I'm like, I don't know, do these people give any thought whatsoever to these type of things? It's not only could I not switch a body, nobody can switch a body. Well, first of all, you have to have a body handy when this goes down.
Right.
And then there's multiple people from the whole way. I mean, he goes into the trauma center. He's got a team of probably a dozen people working on him the whole way with cops there and everything else. And it's just, those things, they make great stories, but you only have to look into it about that far to see how ridiculous it is.
Well, when Suge Knight got interviewed about Tupac dying, he sort of hinted at the fact that Tupac might still be alive. And
Right.
I remember there was one of Tupac's friends, this rapper named Tretch, said the last time he saw him was in Cuba. And, there was all these weird conspiracy theories about Tupac not really being dead. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know what Suge's motive is for that. I guess he just, it's a good story, keep a good story going, but it's just not true. And like I said, I was there. I hate to tell people, but he's not coming back. He's dead, and he definitely died that night. And I don't think, other than some guy in a trailer park trying to get insurance fraud, that anybody has really faked their own death in real life. It would be just about impossible to do. And the more famous you are, the harder it would be to do. So it's just not the case. And there's something in people's minds that when somebody is famous, they take almost like on a godlike persona to them, and they just can't comprehend that someone just shot him and he died. It's so simple. Surely there must be more that couldn't have happened. It's like Princess Di getting killed in a car wreck, and people were like, it just couldn't happen. How could somebody so huge, so famous, get killed in a car wreck? And it's like, you know what? They're mortals just like us. They get shot, they drown, they get killed in car wrecks. They're not exempt from this stuff.
So following Tupac dying, a war breaks out in Compton. Are you familiar with anything that kind of happened at that point?
I'm vaguely familiar with it, but I'm certainly not close to it.
Okay.
As far as the investigation or what exactly happened.
But as time passes, the investigation goes from Vegas to L.A. Greg Kading
Right.
At one point gets involved in it and makes some headway in terms of the investigation. Are you being questioned by various police departments, or not really?
Not really. I talked to our guys, but really my information doesn't lend much to the investigative end of this thing. I had my part in it, but from an investigative standpoint, it's really not valuable information. It's my understanding that in LA, there were over 50 search warrants served to find the weapon. And I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, that's 50 search warrants. I mean, I don't know of any crime ever personally, in which there was 50 search warrants or more served looking for this weapon. So, you know, clearly there's an LA connection there. Everybody involved was, you know, had roots in LA or actually lived in LA at the time.
Did you watch the Murder Rap documentary?
I did not.
You did not?
No.
Okay. So in the documentary, there was taped testimony from a guy named Keffe D, who was the uncle of Orlando Anderson, the guy who got beat up at the
Right.
MGM. And in the audio that got played, he basically described how the whole thing went down, how they pulled up next to Suge's car, how Orlando did the shooting, how Suge saw him, recognized him, and so forth. When you hear about the Orlando Anderson theory, does it make sense to you as a police officer?
Absolutely. I would bet that that's exactly what happened. And once again, you know, people don't want to hear it because it's just all too simple. But here's what happens. A guy gets beat up by a different gang of guys. They already don't like each other. They don't like each other so much that one attacks the other in the MGM just because he sees him. There's no words exchanged or anything. It's like, hey, Anderson's over there, and it's on. These guys hate each other that much. This guy Anderson, everybody knew he was apparently a shooter. Everybody knew he's a killer. This is not something that he hasn't done before. So after he gets beat up real good, what does he do? He goes and gets a gun, comes back and kills the guys that do it. It's painfully simple, but that's how life works. You know, it's happened. That's how the street works. It's happened to 100 guys before Tupac, but they weren't famous. But we see this script, so to speak, played out over and over and over again. Somebody gets beat up, they get a gun, come back and even the score. And sometimes it doesn't even take that. I can't tell you how many times we've had bouncers in some of these clubs shot because they kicked the guy out. Well, he feels he's been disrespected in front of everybody, so what does he do? Goes and gets a gun, comes back and shoots the bouncer. So, I mean, just the slightest little things sometimes, especially in the gang world. And to me, it's pretty obvious that that's what happened. Even though it's painfully simple, I think it's pretty clear.
You recently came in contact with Idi Amin of the Outlaws.
Right.
The two of you sat down and did an interview together for a TV series.
We did.
And Idi was actually there at the crime scene when you arrived.
Right.
I guess you may not remember him, but he remembered you.
Yeah, I didn't remember him, but he remembered me, and it just stands to reason. You know, I'm a cop, I'm seeing all of these guys constantly all day long, but for him, I'm the guy that came up in a police uniform pointing a gun at him, so he's going to remember me. He said that I think his words were, "Yes, you look very familiar to me," something to that effect.
What was your interaction?
You know,
I mean, recently when you guys met up.
Right, recently. You know what? It was surprisingly a very positive meeting, I thought. You know, I don't have anything against those guys from that night. You know, I was concerned about getting the shooter, not the guys in his entourage. Yes, I would have liked them to have cooperated more than they did. You know, they're from a place where their rules are, when there's a problem, they take care of it. They don't want to talk to the police. But I tell you, it's 20 years later, which doesn't seem like 20 years, but he's older, I'm older. We can look back at this, and I have no bad feelings towards the guy at all. I think we got along better than really anybody would have expected, because we kind of met unbeknownst to each other. And I don't know, you know, I wish the guy well. It was good meeting him, and I even felt maybe a little bit of, for lack of a better word, maybe a little closure on the incident, because I had never talked to somebody from the other side before. And to tell you the truth, I thought they were all dead, other than Suge. I know Suge's still alive, but he's facing a murder rap. He's not allowed to talk to anybody, and I will most likely probably never get a chance to talk to Suge. He probably would want to talk to me anyway, but I would talk to him given the opportunity. But that looks like it's not going to happen, at least certainly not anytime soon. So it was good to see that there was another guy still alive there, and we were able to kind of see this thing from the other's perspective. And I was told he was a little bit hot about that night, that he got a gun pointed at him, and not that I would do anything different. I kind of explained the hand I was dealt, and he understood it, and I can understand his thing too. He's like, look, I'm just trying to check on my friend, pointing a gun at me, proning me out, the whole bit, and I get it, but we all had our jobs to do, and everything worked out okay. So he seemed like a decent guy to me, and I wish him well.
If the people at the crime scene had cooperated with the police, do you feel like the case would have been solved fairly quickly?
It's hard to speculate on that, but it certainly would have helped. And I don't even think the information on the white Cadillac came out until the next day or the day after. Because when you have an incident like that, the very first piece of information you need is what kind of car. Because if you can put that out over the air, the cops have a good chance of still getting that car, somewhere in town in that area, especially a white Cadillac. There's not a million of those. They kind of stand out. And if we'd have had that information that night, would it have helped? It's anybody's guess, but it certainly wouldn't have hurt.
When you've been involved in situations like this, these types of shootings, how often do people not cooperate in the same manner that Tupac's entourage didn't cooperate?
Regularly, in a thing with, here we got, gang members on gang members for the most part, even though, one of them ends up being extremely famous. It's still gang members on gang members, and you just tend not to get a lot of cooperation in those type of situations. Sometimes you do. Usually the people who will break down if they have information are family of the victim, because they want to see this guy, whoever it is, they want to see the guy prosecuted and they want some justice. So if they're around, that's usually your best place to go if they have anything for you.
But in this case, nothing came up.
Nothing.
Do you feel that at some point this case will be closed?
No. It's currently an open homicide investigation, and it's got less a chance of anything going to court now that it ever has, which is one of the reasons I finally spoke about it. People say, well, why didn't I come out right away with this information? It's like, I can't talk about this. Open homicide investigation. I had moved on with my career. I left as a sexual assault lieutenant, where I worked in that unit for several years, and I can't come out as a lieutenant on the department working for sexual assault and come out commenting on homicide cases. It would be the end of me, and it probably should be if it was, but it's just not my place to do it. But it has reached a point where clearly there's not going to be any prosecution. Most of the witnesses are dead. The prime suspect is dead. People have moved on with their lives, and nothing is ever going to happen with it.
So you just heard the testimony of Orlando's uncle, Keffe D, who was in the car, who described to the police how the shooting happened. When you hear all these details from Keffe D and you match them up to what you saw at the scene of the crime, does everything match up, or are there a couple things that don't make sense?
No, I think that's dead on with everything that I could see. And him saying that he Suge got shot in the side of the head and everything was consistent. Everything would be consistent with what I saw in that car. There's still a lot of things, in that story, not a lot of things, but there's still some of the things in the story that, you can't really prove or disprove. Did one guy lean over and shoot, or did the guy right there shoot? It's hard to say. But I think it's certainly not a far-fetched story at all. I would say it seems like a pretty credible story to me. And one of the things that just everybody forgets is that Suge is shot in the side of the head. And like you said, he thought he was dead. And when I was looking at Suge, I couldn't believe that this guy was running around like nothing's happening while he's got this hole and the blood flying out of the side of his head, and he's just, like nothing's going on. But I would say that sounds all accurate to me.
And based on Keffe D's description, everybody except for Keffe D is dead now.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, Orlando got killed I think a year or so later from a non-related fight that broke out into a gunfight, I believe in Compton at a car wash. And the other two guys died, I think, from various reasons. Keffe D is still alive. And that's essentially the only person connected to the shooting from the other side who actually laid out the story on tape. No one else has wants to talk about
So of
it.
the four in that car, he's the only one still alive?
Yeah. Yeah, the other two have died since then.
Right.
One of them, I think, was really obese and ended up dying from health reasons. The other person, I'm not quite sure.
Right.
But yeah, he's the only person still alive.
Well, those guys are pretty hardcore bangers. They have a short lifespan.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a story. It's quite a story. Did your involvement in this really affect your life or affect your career, or you just kind of went
It
on
didn't
with your
affect
job?
my career because I didn't really come public with it until 2 years ago. I told it wasn't like it was a big secret. I mean, I told my friends, there was the guys that I worked with and stuff, but to them it was almost, it was almost, teasing me a little bit because, I was so good getting a confession, getting the words out of somebody. I get FU, so of course your cop buddies are gonna let you know about that. But it didn't really affect me at all until I came out public with it. And strangely enough, I get the death threats and the hate mail and everything else, which I still don't really get it. But there's so much bad information out there on the internet that some people are going to form opinions, and I guess that's just the way it's going to be.
With a case like this that got international attention to this day, was there a certain degree of embarrassment around the Las Vegas Police Department not being able to solve someone getting killed on the Strip?
I don't know if it was embarrassment. I think they felt a little heat. I know I talked to the Lieutenant Wayne Peterson is another. He's a friend of mine, good guy. And like he said, in a situation like that, you're really doing everything you can to try to get this, try to get a suspect and try to get an arrest out of this thing. And a lot of people have said, Las Vegas Metro didn't go after the killer because it was bad press. They didn't like Tupac and that kind of stuff. It's just absolutely not the case. I mean, it's the kind of thing, like you said, it's a homicide in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. We want that guy who did it badly. And unfortunately, it didn't play out that way. And, like I said, he died, the main suspect dies a year or two after the event. So even if they were able to put a case on him, there is no case. So, yeah, we would have all liked to see it end differently, but didn't end up that way.
Well, Tupac hated the police.
I'm not surprised.
He said, fuck you. His last words were basically, fuck the police.
Pretty much.
He's had a lot of run-ins with the police. He had actually shot 2 police officers in Atlanta. Did you hear about that situation?
No, I wasn't even aware of that.
There was a situation in Atlanta where two white off-duty officers got into some sort of altercation with a black kid. Tupac put himself in that situation. An argument ensued. The 2 cops pulled out guns on him. He pulled out his own gun, shot both of them, and it went to court. And it was established they had been drinking, and he ended up getting off, which for a black man to shoot 2 white officers in the South and get off was unheard
I
of.
was completely unaware of that.
Yeah.
I did read that he was, apparently when he was shot before, he was shot in a hotel lobby.
Recording studio lobby.
Okay, recording studio lobby. But as the paramedics were taking him out, so I've read, but he was laying on the gurney, but he's giving everybody
Yeah.
the double fingers as they're wheeling him out.
Yeah.
So I felt a little better about that. I was like, okay, it's not just me. Apparently this is what he does.
Well, he talked about punk police. He'd gotten beat up by police himself. There was his stepbrother had taken pictures of him badly messed up. I think he ended up suing the police department and winning. He spoke badly about the police over time. Well, and on top of it all, to really put it all in perspective, his mother was a Black Panther.
That I was aware of, yeah.
And she was part of the Panther 21, where they were all arrested, charged with trying to bomb a building and so forth. And she actually, I think, she almost gave birth to him in prison. And, being a Black Panther, which is very anti-police.
Right.
You take all these things and you put them together and you say, how hard is the police department really going to work to solve the death of a guy that's bad-mouthed the police for so many years?
Well, I can see where you might, or not necessarily you, but people might think that, but it's just not the case. I mean, any homicide, the police department badly wants to solve it. They're going to do everything they can, and on something like this, because it is getting a lot of press, or it was getting a lot of press, they're even going to go harder. I mean, like we said earlier, 50-something search warrants served. Departments from other agencies working together. I mean, people doing everything they can. But everything that you described to me in his anti-police beliefs, it's trying to strike me weird that some people are so surprised that his words to me were "fuck you." I mean, is it really a big shock to anybody? I mean, people were like, would he really say that? And it's like, well, if you know anything about him, of course he'd say that, because that's how he felt. And I think he didn't know they were going to be his last words. He was just expressing how he felt. And I don't see why some people will think that's hard to believe, that would be the last thing he said. But as fate would have it, that's how it turns out.
Well, I think that's why so many people look at Tupac the way they do, because in an age where people act one way in front of the camera and act another way behind the camera, Tupac was actually authentic to everything that he put into his music, and in his dying words was fuck the police.
Exactly. I mean, he was, those that say he was hardcore to the end, well, apparently he was hardcore to the end, man. He walked the walk. Some people have accused me of saying that, well, I'm just trying to say something negative about him because I don't like him. And it's like, first of all, I have no like or dislike for him. I'd never met the guy. I don't have anything against him. But to go out the way he did, I could have said a lot of things if I wanted to reflect him in a negative light. I could have said, well, he cried, or he said, please help me, or, some kind of stuff like that. But I gave him his dues, He said what he said, and, let the cards fall where they may. But yeah, he was hard till the end.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I definitely appreciate you coming in.
Oh, it's been fun.
It's a hell of a story. And, hopefully at some point they will be able to close this case.
Yeah, I don't think anything more is going to happen, unfortunately. No. But it's one people will be talking about for a long time.
Yeah.
And, it is what it is.
It is what it is.